For a little bit of time now, you guys have been asking for a buyer's guide on the LMM. What we're going to do today is we're going to do an LBZ and LMM buyer's guide combined. Even though these two trucks share two different body styles, from the classic body style to the new LMM body style from '06 to '07, they actually share very similar mechanicals, save the emissions components on the LMM. We'll talk about those later in the video, but the failure rates and the common issues we've seen with both of these trucks have been so similar that we're going to combine the buyer's guides together. Of course, with any buyer's guides, you're going to be looking at what type of truck you want. It's not up to us to tell you what body style is best, regular cab, extended cab, long box, crew cab. That's all up to you in deciding what you want. Same with price range and mileage. What we want to talk about is the time that you finally show up at the truck. All these trucks are getting older. The classic body style trucks from '06 are now hitting on 18 years, and the newer trucks are hitting 14. They're going to have the possibility of rust, depending on where you live. If you live in Canada, they're probably rusty. Check out the cab corners, check out the frame rails. What I actually found on my LBZ was inside of the bottom of the box. If you looked into the passenger side footwell through the gap between the frame and the box, you could see the bottom side of my box was just absolutely disintegrating. My truck had about 360,000 kilometers on it. It was driven regularly as a delivery truck. Wasn't doing all that well. I never even bothered checking under the fender flares. That's where you want to look as well. You want to come in at the inside of the fenders and look at those fender flares. When you take those off, there's almost always nothing left. So you want to check around these trucks for fender flare rust. You want to check for cab corner rust, box side rust, and underbox rust, as well as the components on the frame. Outside of that, you want to make sure the interior components are good. Overall, I wouldn't say the interiors of any of the older American trucks are particularly Mercedes quality, but they do hold up fairly well, so you can make sure that apart from the bolstering on the seats that you might have a bit of rips in, that everything works and everything is good for you. If you end up liking the truck that you're looking at, then you'll want to go into the next thing, which is running it, starting it, seeing what happens when you put load on it, because that's where you're going to see the most common issues. Probably one of the most common issues we're seeing on those trucks is the head gaskets. So you want to make sure that the oil is all oil colored and not looking like a chocolate milkshake. Same with coolant, make sure it's coolant colored and not looking like also a chocolate milkshake. Once you have checked that it isn't, you want to run it and you want to make sure that you have that truck running up to operating temperature. If it keeps creeping, if you start to see pressure out of the coolant reservoir, if you start to see any kind of signs that it's not actually cooling or being all that happy, either do a qualified check yourself to make sure that there's no compression lost in the cylinders, or you want to make sure that now that you've been running it for a while, there's no longer a mix between the two. But you also, if you don't feel comfortable doing that but suspect there's a problem, we recommend bringing it to a shop. Head gaskets aren't the end of the world. You put a new head gasket on an LBZ or an LMM and you get a good truck after that because they still have a lot of good components. You just want to make sure that if you are worried, take it to a mechanic to confirm, and you can work that into the price of buying the truck. There's no sense in just buying it and seeing later. Give the truck a good half hour or so run. Get it out on the highway. Make sure nothing happens with the transmission either. You'll want to check the fluid. You'll want to talk to the previous owner to make sure they were doing services at the recommended intervals. And you want to make sure the fluid doesn't smell burnt. It's not brown. It doesn't smell bad. Transmission fluid is a red, sweet liquid, and it should stay that way even if the transmission's got some miles on it. If they have done regular flushes and you can get out there, you do want to roll into it a little bit. I'm talking about full throttle. I'm not saying race the truck, but I'm saying when you have an open stretch of highway, you're doing about 45, 50 miles an hour, get onto it and make sure that it doesn't slip. Make sure that it can shift a couple of gears. Make sure that it is happy. If they've got to send it to the moon tune along with a 9-inch lift and 45-inch tires, that transmission's been working. Make sure that it still can and make sure it doesn't throw any codes. The Allison 1000 is a stout transmission unless it hasn't been maintained or it's been put through a lot of hell. Realistically, there's not that many stock transmissions that take more power than the truck was built with stock. They do great with the initial power, except for Dodges, but they don't do all that great with the big power tune and some lift kits. So you want to make sure that it doesn't slip. You want to make sure that it takes wide open throttle. If they tell you to drive around at a quarter throttle, they could probably hide a transmission fault until you hook up your fifth wheel. Once again, that's not the end of the world. There are upgraded transmissions if you want to make more power, and there are replacement units that are not terribly expensive, especially if you work the price into the truck. If you've driven the truck and you've made sure that the transmission shifts well, it doesn't overheat, and the coolant stays where the coolant should be, and the oil stays where the oil should be, there's only a couple more things you really have to check. These are stout trucks. I'd say they're almost the 12-valve or 24-valve of the Duramax world, as well as the 6.7 Power Stroke of the Ford world. They're stout trucks, and honestly, a lot of the employees here at Dirty Diesel have owned them. I've had 2 of our employees currently have them, and a couple people have had them before. We all like the LMM and the LBZ. But there are injector issues coming up as they get higher in mileage. We've seen them hit 1,000,000 miles or 1,000,000 kilometers, but that's all dependent on how much you service it, and generally just now they're getting older. If you put a 2006 truck in 2006 and put 100,000 miles a year on it doing RV shuttling, you're probably going to get to 1,000,000 with little to no problems. Now that the trucks are almost 20 years old, components are wearing out. So what you're going to want to do for the injectors is to do a balance check. You take a CTS3 scanner, which we just recommend having for the truck once you buy it, so it's worth buying it before you go to look at trucks. You take a CTS3 scanner and you do a balance rate check, and we're going to cut to that right now. You want to come over to your CTS3 that you have on here, and here's really why we recommend bringing it or some sort of scanner that has an injector balance rate ability. You swipe up on the bottom of the scanner here, and you go over to diagnostics, and then you're going to hit injector balance. When this thing is in park and up to operating temperature, they should sit plus or minus 4. This truck's cold because we've measured it before, and you'll see all of these injectors are sitting between plus and minus 4. This one's the closest, but as I said, the truck is cold. We've done this 100 times, so we do know what this truck sits at. But these are the 8 injector balance rates that you want to look at to know which injectors are bad. If you see a minus or a plus above 4, then you're going to know that injector is probably the one that's going to be going or is gone if you already have a knocking or a misfire type code. That's why we really recommend this, because the injectors are by far one of the most expensive things you can fix on these trucks. Now that you've checked to make sure your injectors are right, or if they're not, here's a little top tip. If you're planning to modify one of these trucks by getting some big old injectors for it and a big old turbski, then what you want to do is you want to use that balance rate check to say the injectors are bad, it discounts the truck purchase price, and then you're going to buy the performance injectors you were going to get anyways. Some boy math right there, the truck's now cheaper. Same thing with the turbo. Turbochargers on these trucks are variable geometry turbos, which is a really neat piece of kit. Lots of trucks have had that. The Power Stroke's got it in 06. The LBZ's got it for the the Duramax has got it for the LLY. And I believe 2010 for the 4th gen, or maybe 2007 for the 6.7, got variable rate turbos. They're awesome units, and they allow you to have good low down torque because it makes basically the vanes change the size of the scroll size of the hot side of the turbo to make it spool up faster. Then as it gets higher into the RPM range, you get under higher load, the vanes open up inside the hot side of the turbo to make it act like a bigger turbocharger. This gives you great low end power, and it gives you great high end power. Of course, there's a bit of compromise on both sides, but it makes for an all-round usable unit, and we're seeing 400 or 500 horsepower on these things from factory, and then you're looking at 500-600 horsepower on modified ones. VGT turbos are a solid unit, but they get sooty. They get hot. I mean, these are the exhaust side of the turbochargers. They are working hard, and that's what we've been seeing with LBZs and LMMs. Their turbochargers are just wearing out due to age. It's not really a problem, and we wouldn't say it's a big concern, but you do want to make sure a couple of things. Because they are failure points, you want to make sure that it accelerates cleanly from a stop. If you're noticing the truck almost feels like it just has a giant turbo on it, you hit the gas, nothing, and all of a sudden it hits a wall of boost, that's quite likely because the turbochargers are stuck in its open position. Or vice versa, if you find that it has lots of low end punch but very little up top, it's because it's likely stuck in its closed position as a small turbocharger. Making sure that the turbocharger vanes move, these will also have codes. Make sure you scan the codes, make sure there's no passcodes for turbocharger vane positions or turbocharger actuator position sensors or codes. These are some of the things you want to make sure you check to ensure that the truck has a functioning variable geometry turbo. Same thing if you're looking to upgrade the turbocharger and you find a truck with a bad one, discount the truck a little bit, discount the turbo you were buying anyways. Lastly, we want to talk about the emissions equipment. For the 2006-2007 classic body style trucks, what you had was an EGR valve. Of course, you can turn them off with a tune so long as the place you live is completely okay with that, or you can leave it be and kind of ignore it for the life of the truck. We don't see them fail that often or really do anything to affect the drivability of an LBZ. The LMM has a few more issues. This is one of the first times they installed the DPF. These are pre-DEF DPF, so they don't inject the DEF fluid, so at least you don't have to fill up those tanks. But what they do is they basically burn an entire tank of fuel to try to clean out the built up soot inside the exhaust, and you will briefly get terrible mileage for a gas tank as it creates fire inside of your exhaust. Questionable system at best, but it did not really work either. It's not the most reliable system, but if you have one, and let's say your state requires you to keep one, then it does work. Make sure that you allow your truck, if it starts a regen, to finish a regen. Make sure that the owners who have used it before say the same thing. If you ask them when it starts regenning and you just pulled up to your driveway, do you A, turn it off immediately and make it tomorrow's problem, or B, wait it out and see to make sure that it gets done? If they pick the second, then you're happier with that because that means the emissions equipment has been allowed to do its cycle of things. If you have to keep it, use it as well as possible. If you happen to be in a place that allows you to have it fall off and then install a little piece of software on the truck to make it forget that it was ever there, well, that's going to be your best bet because those they are problematic systems. And as much as you can treat them nicely, emissions equipment failures are the most common point of failure that we see on modern trucks. That's a general list of what to look for with an LBZ and an LMM. They're just stout trucks. They don't really have that many issues that bring them in for us, so we don't often find ourselves recommending all that much to look at. Of course, it's an older GM product, so it's going to have an independent front suspension. Make sure that all the front suspension components are tight. There are kryptonite upgrade front end products that you can get through us, which will make sure that the front end, if it has any problems with the wheel bearings, ball joints, the upper control arms, those will all get made much more stout to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But maybe have the owner of the truck swing the wheel side to side while you lie underneath to check for ball joint play, tie rod play, and as I said, any of the upper suspension control arms that are known to have issues. That's really where you're going to see a lot of the maintenance issues on these trucks, and it's definitely not a deal breaker. Rebuilding the front end is a couple $1,000s, but if you do it with quality components like kryptonite front end, then you really won't have to worry about it for years to come. After all that, if the truck you're looking at matches what you expected and want, run with it. These are great trucks. We recommend them to tons of people. The Allison 1000 6-speed and the 6.6 Duramax of these years is pretty stout, and we've seen people put tons of miles on them. I've had an LBZ. I like the classic body style, but I also like the LMMs. The first couple of years of the Denali were sweet trucks. I think that's a great piece of kit that came on those things, and the Denali line has been going great since. We hope this helped you find the right truck, and if you end up picking one up, head over to dirtydieselcustoms.ca and see if there's anything on that site that might help you out.